We're going to record this session. Welcome, welcome. This is our every other month Networks in Action session. Welcome, welcome. Happy to have you here. We'll see if some others roll in. There were probably another 10 signups, at least, if I remember correctly. So you never know who's going to show up. Very happy to have you all here with us today, though. And thanks for introducing yourselves in the slides. That's great. So this series of Networks in Action is a fairly new series. We started it with a first session back in February. This is a session for us to be able to take a fairly large network-related topic and try to unpack it. So that's what we do in these Networks in Action sessions. They are a little bit different than our community conversation sessions that we also run that now rotate. We do one of these two every month. The community conversations are also topical, but are more about peer sharing and exchange and peer learning. And in fact, you may be interested to join our next session coming up next month. Our next community conversation in May will be on generating revenue for networks. So more details to come in the newsletter that will come out next week on that session. I think everybody here has been in a collective mind space, other than maybe Angela. I'm not sure, Angela, that I've met you before. Maybe I have and I've forgotten. Apologies if that's true. So I will not give the typical collective mind spiel to start us off because you're already familiar and we're so pleased you're in this space with us today. So welcome, welcome. Lovely to see you all again and to see all these familiar faces. So the agenda for today is in slide 5. And Carissa, let me share. Here's the link to our shared slides. So we ask that everyone has it open and follow along in the shared slides rather than sharing our screens. We find this a little bit more interactive. So we use these shared slides. The agenda, as I said, for today is in slide 5. So right now we're doing the welcome and checking in. And in 1 minute or less than, I'm going to give you just a brief presentation, a brief overview of the summary, in fact, and synthesis of what you and the other registrants for this session shared in response to the registration questions around what this topic means for you. And of course, our topic for today is neutrality in network management. This came up for us as a relevant topic in a recent Networks 101. In fact, we run monthly 101 sessions on networks and network management. If you haven't joined one, which I think you all have, feel free to, and they happen every month. But there was a lively discussion, I think a couple of months ago now, maybe 3 months ago for that matter, in a Networks 101 about this topic. And so we thought we would give it some more space in this format and see what others have to say about it. So we'll start with a brief presentation of what you did have to say about it in response to the questions when you registered. Then we'll go through this format, which is 3 questions of what, so what, now what. So the what is, what are we talking about? How do we define this term, this topic that we're addressing today, which is, of course, today is neutrality in network management. Then talking about the implications of that. So based on how we view this topic, what does that mean for us in our networks and in our network management practice? And then coming back together, we'll do those in small breakouts, and then coming back together for a discussion of takeaways. So the now what does this mean going forward? What do we take away? How do we integrate this in our potentially expanded, deepened understanding of this topic? So that's our agenda for today. Again, we've got these shared slides here. In 1 second, I'm going to move into the just brief overview, which is on slides 6 through 8. As I'm giving that brief overview, if you have any questions and reflections that you want to share in slide 9, that's great. We will also have a moment to reflect verbally and ask questions and such after I go through that, before we then move into our breakouts for the first question of the what, which is to be captured in slide 10. Each of these questions has a slide here where we'd love to have you capture your thoughts, and we will integrate that into the summary blog that we write following these sessions. So helpful to capture all the ideas and thoughts for posterity, if nothing else. So that's our plan for today. Let's get to it. Again, welcome. So happy to see you all today. We are on slide 6. So we asked a couple of questions, a few questions in the registration form about what what neutrality in network management means to you. And this first slide is sort of a compilation, a bit of a synthesis of some of the key ideas. There were a number of them that came up about how to define this phrase, this term, this idea. And just to sort of note a couple of things. So there were a number of responses that were talking about, we're working towards a common vision, a common good. So really working towards that as a key element of this neutrality piece. Other elements were about not being overly biased, trying to be impartial and fair, trying to treat people equitably and equally, trying not to overly influence things, trying to integrate the viewpoints and ideas of our members across the network, creating a space in which that can happen, in which members can in fact take the lead, do the work, for example, and really appreciating all of those members as contributors, and also, of course, recognizing that there are power dynamics and that we have to try to address them transparently and fairly. So these were some of the points, or this is a synthesis of the points that you all raised in your responses to this question of how you would define neutrality in network management. That's our what. The so what comes on the next slide, slide 7 and 8, in sort of two parts here. The question, we asked a couple of questions that I've combined here in these two slides. Is it possible to be neutral in network management? Which I think we could have some lively discussion around. And then, depending on the responses to that, what are the implications? So we see some points here that, again, this idea of network managers playing a role in moving forward the collective action of the network members. So this is our reason for being, right? And then I think there was a fairly strong consensus around the fact that full, if we want to call it a fact, that full neutrality isn't possible, but it is a skill that we can develop to try to be more neutral. And so there's some points here around what that could mean and how to do that. And then an important point, the last bullet here, of recognizing there are times when we shouldn't be neutral and when we in fact need to take some sort of stance. So there are some points here again in response to these questions of, is it possible to be neutral and what are the implications? And then there were a number of ideas too that were shared in the responses about ways in which to potentially be more neutral or work towards being more neutral. And these fell into sort of two categories, one of which is more on the personal level as a network management, how we can act and react and behave and such in that role. And then also within the structures and systems of the network itself. So some points here that cover both of those that are sort of thrown into the mix together. And they're thrown into the mix together because some, for example, ensuring transparent decision-making is probably both, right? That's, for example, something that we need to do as a network manager on a personal level, but also we ideally will have structures and systems within our network to make sure that that happens or to foster that to the extent possible. So again, lots of interesting ideas here, both in terms of, back to slide 6, thinking about how we can define neutrality in network management. And then in these other slides, 7 and 8, just what does that mean? How do we enact that? How can we be more neutral if that's possible? And what are the implications of that? So this is the grounding for this conversation. Before we move into our first round of discussion in pairs, I believe, based on the size of our group, in that first discussion, we're just going to talk again about the definition of neutrality in network management. Any sort of comments or questions right now before we do that? We will have lots of time for discussion, but just anything that's coming up immediately that you'd like to share or questions you might have.
I have a question. Hi, everyone. Kirsten, did you consider like the words objectivity and impartiality and neutral, and what helped you land on the word neutral?
That is a great question. No, didn't think about those different terms. Used the term that had come up in the session, in the Networks 101 session a few months ago, which I think either completely was around the word neutrality. I think that was either that was the word that was used the whole time in that part of the discussion, or the term that was used the most. So but that's a really good point, Carissa. And then in this summary of these ideas, this is just what people shared, right? So interesting that some of those things didn't come up, right? But yeah, really good, really interesting point. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to go into pairs and just have a little discussion for just a few minutes around the what, the definition of this. You can work from, again, that slide 6 if you like, but this is the first question. This is the what, our definitions, what we mean when we think about neutrality in network management. And so feel free to raise further points along this line of terminology, Carissa. So let's go into these groups. Please introduce yourself, say hello to your pair partner before you dig in. And we'll just spend a few minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, just having a brief conversation. And then we'll come back and share a little bit about what came up for us. So this is our first round. I'm going to open up the breakout rooms. And we'll see you back here in a few minutes.
That was not long enough.
Welcome back. Yeah, I was just thinking that when people don't come back before they're pushed back, it usually means they're having an in-depth or good or other adjective conversation. So, all right, well, let's continue it. Tell me, tell the other groups, what were you talking about? What came up for you? What were the key points? Whoever wants to jump in. Such practiced network managers. Nobody wants to jump in over somebody else.
I can go. I was just sharing a little bit about the bullet on your slide that resonated with me the most. And I think I may have written something about this in my RSVP. So maybe that's why it resonates. But just around letting members take the lead and do the work. So in my network, we offer different programming that basically helps folks do their work better at their organization. It's the short version of it. And we really don't tell people what to work on or like how we will support them. We just offer different programming that we like know helps people make progress and like improve their work, but we really seek the folks in our network to step up as leaders and say like, I want to do a project about XYZ. And then our programming comes in and we support them to do that. And we invite other network members to join it. And it's really about kind of that idea of like voting with their feet. Like if people don't want to join that team, they don't, and that doesn't get off the ground, but it's really very driven by our members. And that's kind of, yeah, that's where I come from in my network and how we kind of handle neutrality in, even though I don't think full neutrality is actually possible, but that's kind of how we deal with it.
And Lauren and I were partners, and we were getting to the point where we ran out of time, so it's good to continue here to say that I was struck with that line in the slide as well. But on the other side of it, of the struggle of trying to do it that way, and then having the members say, we want you to take the lead and help us because we can't organize ourselves or figure ourselves out. So please take the lead. And so we're continually trying to find that balance between member input and leading. And so that could appear not as neutral, perhaps. So it's making me think actually to just take a step back and say, if we are continually checking in and getting the pulse, maybe that is fair enough, good enough to get progress done. But the ideal is, I think, what Lauren has been able to do.
I will say though that that problem still comes up for us. Like people will still, they don't ask it exactly like you just said, but we'll often have folks being like, well, what do you all think? Because I don't know if it's just a power thing because we're the hub and they see us in a particular way, or if some people have said like, oh, well, you have like this field level understanding, or like you see the full picture, so you should be able to point us in a particular direction, or like tell us what to work on. And we're like, but you're the experts because you're on the ground. So it even though we do that, that still comes up and people still say like, but what do you want us to do?
I'm happy to jump in. So I partnered with Miriam, and although we have very different types of roles, it was a very interesting conversation that did unfortunately get cut short. But I work for a backbone organization, and I've recently been attempting to, I work in homelessness initiatives and trying to increase landlord engagement and bring together different case managers with different service provider agencies that are just facing these very similar struggles. So we began facilitating a meeting monthly about 9 months ago. And I ended up, I guess, because I'm part of the backbone organization and I've heard throughout different communities, this has been a particular challenge where the backbone rep ends up kind of being put in this leadership position and people are waiting on me to make decisions and set agendas and all of that. So we are actually meeting tomorrow. So this is good timing to restructure. And the big goal is, how do we create that neutrality where everyone feels like this is a space that they can contribute to and really share what's going on in here and here, because we do a lot of emotional work. Everyone is very passionate about what they do and the population they serve. So it's something that we're going to address tomorrow. And my goal is to figure out how to, I'm providing some resources, but I want to facilitate. I want to bring up some of the questions that do need to be addressed and kind of take a seat back and listen to responses, but also try to get folks to draw them out to really share. And so when they're feeling like they're in a safe place, builds trust. And then you can also kind of determine what is the capacity of everybody in this group. So we make sure backbone isn't carrying all of it. And how do you get rid of that hierarchical idea and mindset, which tends to, I think, happen. But Miriam, she got cut off when she was talking about what her work looks into is attempting to do is create equity among the stakeholders. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, Miriam, but maybe you would like to finish that thought. It could be helpful for the rest of the group.
I might just want to make a parallel between, I've been doing a bit of work in mediation, and we speak a lot, of course, of the neutrality of the mediator, and we speak about the impartiality. And then I heard about another conception of it, and some people would rather phrase it as multi-partiality, and I somehow like it better. Why? Because, and I think that's the same for the role of the network in terms of the so-called neutrality. It's not just about, you know, giving equal space to everyone and equal voices, but it's really about giving equity, because most of the members often they don't have the same power, they don't have the same capacities. So how can we put them at the same level so that all of them indeed they are equal, because we treat them in an equitable manner? So I don't know if that makes sense. So some of this idea of multi-partiality for me makes more sense. And just very small example, it's not about, you know, spending the same time with each partner, like spending 1 hour with each of them, but it's spending the time that is necessary for them to express themselves. And for some of them, it will be in 10 minutes, they have said everything they needed. For some others, they will need like 1 hour. And it's fine, but you have given to them somehow the same access to you, but it's just different depending on their needs. So that's something that I found quite interesting.
And also, this is more of, I would love to continue conversation with Miriam too. So can we put, if people don't mind, putting like emails in the chat? So maybe we can follow up with each other post meeting, if folks are up for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We love when people connect. We don't want to make the assumption that they want to, that you want your emails to be public information, but we're happy to have you share them with each other. Tina and Sonia, I don't know if you had anything you want to share, any highlights that came up for you too?
I don't know, Sonia, do you want to share what we?
Yeah, I mean, I think our conversation went very much in the direction that Miriam was mentioning. Like, I don't know that I believe that network managers should be neutral, and the reason I'm here is because like I wanted to hear the perspective of people who do, right? The reason I don't know that I as a network manager would necessarily focus on neutrality would be for the reasons that Miriam said. Pretty much, like I don't have too much more to add. I don't think that people who want to be neutral in network management are intending to like replicate power structures or anything like that. Like I don't think it's a bad impulse, but I do think that without a lot of thought put into like the racial, gender dynamics, specifically racial, I would say, but also gender and like other dynamics in the network, like it could turn into a thing that's perpetuating things that we don't necessarily want to. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong. That's just like my own perspective.
But it wasn't just your perspective, because I was very much sharing that and having concerns about neutrality when there's times when the silence or, you know, could inadvertently try to give equal space means that some people are actually silenced, or, you know, certain things are, as you said, oppression or colonial attitudes are still perpetuated. So there's that role of, I love that word, Miriam, about how to kind of foster so that all the voices have the same kind of power, but what that means to make it, what's needed might not be the same in each group, so for each individual. Yeah, being aware of our biases and all that.
Great. So we're getting to equity. We're getting to inclusion and various other points here. All right, we're gonna go to this. We're gonna keep discussing, but we're gonna push to this next question. So we are moving to the so what question. What are the implications of any of this within our networks? What does this mean, or for us as network managers? we're already talking about this to some extent, but what does this all mean for us? So this is the so what. This is how we're thinking about neutrality and network management. What are the implications for us? So let's do 2 groups of 3. And I think, yeah, it looks like we're completely splitting you up. So you're with new people. All right, let's spend, again, a short amount of time, but let's have a conversation on the so what, and then we'll come back into the full group. Here we go. Okay, welcome back. How did it go? Smiles, thumbs up, good. Great. Anybody want, you had more to say, of course you did. I find that these sessions, these networks in action sessions in particular they just go very quickly and they're not long enough. But anybody want to share some, somebody from each group, maybe share some highlights with the other group / me?
Sorry, you were saying people from either group, or were you in a group?
No, I wasn't in a group. Sorry, just.
Oh, I heard me, and I was like, wait, are you saying okay? Okay, sorry, never mind.
Some of the highlights from what happened in your groups, so that the other group and I.
Oh, okay. Actually, I don't want to put Lauren on the spot, but Lauren started. She was expanding on her comment. Don't feel like you have to, Lauren. I can also summarize some of what we talked about, but.
No. I would love to hear your summary.
All right, let's go. We were just talking about, honestly, my brain is not working. We were talking about how the world is not neutral. I mean, kind of just like an extension of what we talked about before. It's I don't know that it was necessarily anything. I mean, there was Miriam was starting to say something at the end. I don't want to repeat what I said, but yeah, basically the world is not neutral. Neutrality can lead to things that maybe we weren't intending. But I also, yeah, I mean, I think I understand the impulse beneath it. I think yeah, we do need to make sure that everyone feels safe to express themselves, but that safety looks different for different people. And yeah, Miriam, do you want to finish your thought that you got cut off? Sorry.
No, I was just thinking that we have this tension always between somehow diversity and trying to embrace it because it's a wealth for a network and it's an amazing opportunity, but also how that's also a tension with the issue of efficiency, because we also want to move together towards a common goal. And when you embrace the diversity, sometimes you waste a lot of time in getting consensus, negotiating, and blah, blah, blah. So it's always this tension, and I think it will remain, and it's fine, but how do we deal with that? Ensuring that we don't lose anybody, on the path. But Lauren's experience was quite interesting, so maybe if she wants to share as well.
I feel like I'm taking up the mic too much. Oh, what should I share? Well, I can share kind of the high level of what I was talking about, and maybe if it begs a question, someone just ask a question and I can expand further on something. But I was talking a bit about how the network that I am a part of, we had a previous goal that was pretty generic, but we are in a moment of transition where we're kind of not starting from scratch, but we're starting a new chapter with a new goal that is a lot less generic. It's very specific, and it is also race explicit. And just that we're in this transition moment of thinking about what does that mean? Even just that goal itself is making a particular stance. It's really no longer neutral. And that we're actively thinking right now about what is the criteria to be a part of the network? What do people have to be doing, or what do they commit to, or what do they individually commit to be part of this? And just other implications of that too. Sonia made a really good point about you know, even just something as simple as like meeting norms can end up like being as like policing, and like certain folks are policed more than others, and like what does that mean? So just a lot of swirling questions and interesting things in this moment of like going from generic to not generic, neutral-ish to super not neutral, implications of how we ask people to show up, etc.
Great. Sounds like a really interesting conversation. Any key points from the other group?
I guess we were all saying how this tension that you mentioned, Miriam, you know, it's something that we were mentioning, how we're all really struggling with it. But I guess kind of at the end of the conversation, we were, I was kind of sharing, you know, as a facilitator, some of the things, how important it can be just to name that in a group, about how neutrality is, you know, is maybe is a concept that we might be striving towards, in the sense of, you know, what does it mean for the group? How does this work? What are and then really naming the power dynamics and what is that looking for? Sometimes naming that can be really quite helpful. And also really focusing on the element of safety that you guys mentioned in the other group too, about what people need to feel safe, and actually taking that time to step back and go, what does everyone need to feel safe to engage and to contribute? What does that look like? And really breaking it down. So it's not just your, oh, let's do a group agreement, we'll all respect each other. Like, okay, that's no, like, let's really talk about that. What does this look like? What does this mean? And how's this different? And really drawing it out and saying like, well, what does that look like for you? What would that look for like for others? Is there a different view? And just actually, as a facilitator, giving permission for different views to come out. Because if there's something about as a facilitator, we feel if they could tell that we can't handle the conflict, you know, the different views won't come out as openly, because they won't feel safe, because they could tell you don't feel safe with it. So that was kind of
yeah. And then one thing if we had had more time in the little breakout room, and it's actually a question for you guys, does anyone have any experience with motivational interviewing? Because in what I'm mentally preparing for my tomorrow's meeting as the facilitator is, you know, you can ask a question, someone can give a brief answer or a general answer, but instead of saying, okay, who else, moving on, I think there's always still more to that to unpack, but they again still may not feel like it's safe to really go deeper. So like asking open-ended questions, giving affirmations, reflective listening, trying to remember some of these other things about motivational interviewing. But I was just curious. I haven't used it a lot. I know of it, but I'm going to give it a go tomorrow and see what that might do. Anyone else have any experience with that?
I've used it in workforce development with adult ESL students, and it's been quite effective there. But it's what you're making me think of too in all of this conversation is that's in the moment and in the meeting. It's the pre-work and the post-work is where we could really shape a lot as well. You know, we're humans, and so in the moment as the facilitator, you know, we're carrying like so many things and dynamics in the agenda. It's maybe putting more emphasis, not as much emphasis on the meeting time, but what happens between it can help the work better. I'm just thinking that way. I also have experience with a network member or members that have had no patience for the type of things Tina was describing, and what makes you feel safe, what you, of course, they were the worst offenders of everything and probably not a good fit to the overall network, clearly. But I guess you have to have a point where which we really didn't have gotten to, but where we need to say this might not be the right, even though what you're contributing is helpful to the entire group, the way in which it's done is not helpful. So we need an out on that.
A small thought that's coming up for me too in this realm of facilitation is that, you know, I think another task in facilitation is the synthesis, right? To help the ideas move forward. And there are inherent biases in how, in what we hear, how we hear it, and then how we synthesize it back, right? And whose voices we've heard, how and why, and all the power dynamics there, and our own inherent biases towards certain, you know, I might hear white men's voices with more authority than others, for example, right? So I think that's it. That's something else that's coming up for me about just another complication of all of this. We just have a few minutes left. And again, these conversations just move and there's so much to talk about. In the 3 minutes we have left, now what? What does this mean? Other than just maybe a little plug for the fact that we're going to be running a working group on inclusive networks in June and July. The registration and further details and design of which will be shared in next week's newsletter. But I assume that all of these conversations will come up. We will have lots of space for sort of co-creating within that group with whoever decides to join. So as a now what, that might be a little pin for you. But other thoughts?
Good luck tomorrow, Angela. You'll knock them dead. And come back and tell us how you did it.
Yeah, I was going to say I'll update you guys next time with hopefully some optimistic things to share.
Okay, I guess there's no real way to have a final word on this since there's just so many possible directions for this to go. Glad you're all sharing email addresses here. That's fantastic. If you're willing to quickly take our little feedback survey, we always try to improve how we do these things. So happy to hear your thoughts here. And yes, if there's any interest in carrying some of these conversations and challenges into that working group, happy to have you all sign up. More info to come. Otherwise, this has been fantastic. Really, I'm just shocked by how quickly these conversations move and how much there is to unpack that we don't get to. But thank you for being here. Thank you for being reflective, for sharing, for participating, engaging, listening. Thank you for all of those things. And yes, hope to see you again in another session anytime soon. Lots coming up. Check your newsletter every other week for upcoming opportunities. So good luck, Angela. Good luck, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day and look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, everyone.